Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. In our series in Esther, I want to show you just how deep the roots go, how God has been thundering behind the scenes of the book of Esther, even though he goes unnamed. In our sermon this past weekend and in our curriculum this week, we can see how the Persians have completely forgotten their roots. The whole Persian Empire began. It was foretold by God that he would create this empire for the sake of saving the lives of his Jewish people. And moreover, it was the Persian king Cyrus, the founding king, the one prophesied in the book of Isaiah, like we saw in last week's devotions, who would give them the permission to rebuild the temple. This was how God used ancient Persia. But give it a few generations, and by the time Ahasuerus is on the throne, Xerxes is on the throne, they've completely lost touch with that. But I want to show you how, at their very core, this is why God even started the Medo-Persian Empire. In the second month of the second year after they arrived at God's house in Jerusalem, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Jeshua, son of Jozadak, and the rest of their brothers, including the priests, the Levites, and all who had returned from Jerusalem from the captivity, began to build. They appointed the Levites who were 20 years old or more to supervise the work on the Lord's house. Jeshua with his sons and brothers, Kadmiel with his sons, and the sons of Judah and of Henadad with their sons and brothers, the Levites, joined together to supervise those working on the house of God. This is beautiful wording. Do you see this? The house of God. And then earlier in the text, it was referred to as the Lord's house, here at the end of verse 8. They are building the house for God. And the process of construction is remarkably similar to the accounts from 1 Kings chapters 5 and 6, as echoed in 1 Chronicles 22, as to how Solomon went about even rebuilding it in the first place. We saw in yesterday's devotion that these supplies had been shipped from Tyre and Sidon to the main seaport here in Joppa. That puts all the supplies about 35 miles away from Jerusalem. Nehemiah asked for everything that he would need to rebuild the wall, and Zerubbabel here is leading the charge. The fact that it's taking place here in the second month, the second month puts it in April or May of 536 BC. Is that right? Yep, 536 BC. This is the official end of the 70-year captivity. That they are building the Lord's house. That they are they have arrived at the house of God in Jerusalem. This means that officially the captivity is ended, and it began in 605 BC. So from 605 BC to 536 BC, they've been in captivity, and now, because of the orders given by Cyrus, the founding king of the Persian Empire, the same empire that is currently in our study of Esther threatening the lives of all the Jewish people, where Haman's going to personally fund a genocidal campaign to annihilate every Jewish man, woman, and child and take all of their belongings all in a single day. This guy has risen to power, and Ahasuerus is just letting him do what he wants. They have lost touch with their roots. They don't know that God used their empire from the very beginning for stuff like this. That they're supposed to look after the Jewish people. That they were the ones who would help oversee the rebuilding of the house of God. There's something else I want you to see here. We're naming a bunch of Levites. Zerubbabel seems to be in charge here. There's another guy who's going to appear later on in the narrative, Shashbazzar. In Ezra chapter 5, verse 16, you'll see that he also gets credit for having laid the foundation around the wall. But these guys are Levites, right? The priests, the Levites who had returned from Jerusalem from the captivity and began to build. They appointed the Levites who were 20 years old or more to supervise the work on the Lord's house. And then again, you can see even more specific family lines from the tribe of the Levites who were all joined together to supervise the rebuilding of the house of God. The Levites are back in town. And what's cool to me is that if you had Levites who were, somewhere close to this age threshold, their whole lives had all been in captivity. because it was the captivity began in 605 BC. It's now 536 BC. Remember, in BC years, we count backwards. We're counting down to the birth of Jesus. And these guys are 20 years old, 30 years old. I mean, good grief. And unless there's a 70-year-old who's supervising work on it, there's not one of them here who, not one of these young bucks knew what it was like. But they've been tasked with it because they're Levites, because that's their legacy, because that's their heritage. This is what God has always told them to do. They've never done it before, but they're stepping up. I think this is really cool. If you've never stepped up to what God has called you to do, if you've lost touch with your heritage, with your commissioning, you have been tasked as a minister of the gospel and you've never done it before, you can relate to these guys in Ezra chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. You're kind of like Jeshua here. You're kind of like Cadmiel with his sons, and Henadad, unless Henadad is over 70 years old, in which case he knows exactly what things are supposed to look like. But the fact that they had the threshold was 20 years old meant you had a whole lot of young bucks who were born 50 years after the captivity began, and their whole lifetimes were nothing but captivity. And now they're rebuilding the house of God. Man, Redemption Church, this is kind of hit home for you guys because, man, right now, at the time of recording, it is late at night on June 29th, the day that my Asher and Austin and Asa all learned officially how to stand up on surfboards. Hence, my face and neck are all red from a wetsuit. We are putting together offers for one property, possibly two. And so this hits home a little bit. This is kind of like a text that we are currently in. I think that's pretty rad. So look, like I told you, man, God made the Persian Empire for this exact purpose, and they may have lost touch with that innate protectiveness, but God was still going to use them even here in the book of Esther. Even though the Persians lost touch with who they were, God was going to bring things back around. Even though the Levite generation didn't know what to do yet, God was going to show them exactly how everything worked. Even though you've lost touch with who you are and whose you are and what you're supposed to do, is never too late to begin answering the calling that God's placed on your life. So begin right now.